Alright, so while pretty much every decade has just a whole array of movies that are about the group of teenagers that get into really raunchy situations and more often than not are just trying to get laid at the end of the day, has kind of become a whole genre in itself and has those points in movie history, if you want to say that. Each decade has also seemed to have kind of its definitive one. And so, like, you could say, like, for the, like, in between these, in the 90s, you could probably say that was American Pie, if I had to guess, which we've talked about multiple times on this channel. And then, pre-Porky's in the 70s, we had, like, Animal House. So, here in the 80s and the 2000s, I figured, at least as far as that sort of very thin plot line goes, of just dudes trying to get laid, I would say these would be at the top for Porky's for the 80s and Superbad certainly for the 2000s. And sometimes they'll reach some sort of, not just like, audience acclaim and audiences really taken to them, but critical acclaim also, with Superbad being loved by pretty much everybody. I have a very vivid memory of how just loved Superbad was, like, as soon as it came out. Like, you heard the quotes constantly. Like, it was to the point where it actually kind of drove me crazy how often it was quoted and referenced and all that stuff. It was like such a big fucking deal for a long time. And still, looking ahead now, you can see why. But then there was also the likes of Porky's, which were extremely successful. I think it was number one at the box office like 8 weeks in a row or something when it came out. And it was just this huge, massive thing, which is really funny because while audiences took to it, it didn't have the universal acclaim necessarily that something like Superbad does. And so there's that whole balance of what is it that works and what is it that doesn't and all that. And then thinking ahead also, like, I guess people in my age group would be too old to point this out or figure this out at this point. But I do struggle, like, in this. We've already passed another decade since Superbad's decade, that whole 2010s area. And I'm not really sure what stands out anymore. Because while they weren't in this vein, we've had comedies that went on to be iconic, like The Hangover and Bridesmaids, I guess, are the first two that come to mind. Which, so it was like an every couple of years sort of thing after Superbad. But lately, I don't know what reaches that status, but I'm guessing it'll be a retrospect thing where there's a movie, like, to me or my age group that seems like just any other random comedy right now, that might have some gigantic following in the future. I don't probably, but I don't know what that would be, and I don't have any idea where to start trying to figure out which one that would be. But in the meantime, I want to just focus on these two and talk about how they handled this material in their respective eras and how that's doing now, I guess. So, I think the interesting thing also, putting them both together, is despite the fact that Superbad has the use of cell phones and has, like, extensive conversations about porn websites, both of which in its opening scene, both these movies do feel like they could almost be in any era. Like like some it's like Porky's is so 80s. I sometimes forget that it's set in the 50s. I think it's in 54 is what it's supposed to be. And then it came out in 82. It had like a small release in 81, and then that carried over into 82. With, of course, Superbad being 2007. So when I was 17, so when I was, like, right exactly the target audience. So, yeah, so let's go ahead and go. I think I want to start with Superbad. That'd be easier. Because it's the one that not only have I feel like I've seen a million times, but I've just heard. I feel like I've heard it quoted and discussed even more than I've actually seen it, and I feel like I've seen it a billion times, so that says everything about that. And the thing about it is that typically, like with stuff like Porky's or American Pie, we're looking at a group of friends, and some of these friends may be a strong word. Like, they're just a group that just happens to always be together, and get into these situations. But Superbad, while we have multiple people that come in and out, it's they're really a trio if you include Fogel. But the real focus is just our main two with Seth and Evan, and their whole storyline, and the fact that we immediately set up through comedy what's eventually going to be the sort of dramatic point of the movie, which is the two of them and how inseparable they are and how they're about to go to different schools. And the way they set up that inseparable thing with how they can't even, like, they have to talk on the phone all the way up until their meeting, until Seth pulls up in front of his house, is a funny way to set up what eventually is going to be the core of the drama, believe it or not. And what I think this movie does really well, they may get kind of lost in all of the Apatow-ness of it, with all the dialogue that's so loose it does feel almost improvised, despite the fact that Seth Rogen and Evan Goldberg wrote it, and all of it feels like it would be their dialogue for sure. But it's hard to tell what was sort of last minute and what was scripted from the start. And I think why that's a strength in this, in the way that it isn't in a lot of those comedies that spawned from this era, where it felt really improv heavy, is how natural it feels, because there's obviously a lot going on here, and there's the whole thing where it basically being a coming-of-age movie, like both of them being coming-of-age movies to an extent, though when you think of the coming-of-age movie, more innocent movies might come to mind, but these very much kind of fall into that category also, particularly when you just see, like, the general awkwardness and embarrassments that come to them relentlessly, as they're in this sort of the last week or so of school or something. And those really relatable things, as heightened as they might be, I think there's much more of that heightened sense in something like Porky's. It's trying to be a bit more over the top. But while you could certainly say there's stuff in Superbad that's over the top as well, those little things, like those little moments, really ring true. Like, talking about Michael Cera's interactions, and how Michael Cera was, like, the go-to person for the awkward teenager around this time. And probably still is, since he only looks slightly older these days. But, the whole idea, like, when he's talking to Becca and he has those moments where he, like, it's clear, you get the sense that he doesn't really know how to talk to most people, but specifically people that he's into, like Becca, and he's not sure if she's into him also or not. So when they have this interaction about him potentially getting the alcohol for the party, when he does stuff like calling her miss and sister and stuff like that, and then accidentally punching her tit and stuff like that, it's those things where it may not have happened to you, that exact thing, but maybe something happened to where that same feeling is something familiar. That feeling of embarrassment where something just went totally south, that was just a small thing. And the fact that Becca doesn't even seem particularly bothered by these things, but it's like, and even regardless of what his success rate with her would end up being, those things that will just haunt you in general. And even down to people that only have, like, 2 seconds of screen time. Just bring into this, like the whole thing of Seth not being able to run track very well, and the kid with one leg passes by him. And it's like that adds so much to where Seth is in this moment. And I don't think we ever see that kid again. And then Dave Franco is here. And with Evan just kind of out on the field, just saying, "Hey, I'm just here. I'm doing what I'm supposed to do. So if you want to give me the ball or something, I don't know." And then Dave Franco is that kid that takes Jim way too seriously. And it's like, Dave Franco is in this movie for 5 seconds, and as soon as I see him, it's like, I know that guy. Like, I had a run-in with that guy. There's a lot of that in this movie, and what I think also helps in regards to bringing it to life in that sense is not only how realistically awkward they are, and it doesn't necessarily feel like they're characters that are just written to be as awkward as possible, and for the audience to laugh at. Like, there is that sort of pain. Like, we as an audience obviously are laughing at their situations, But I think a lot of that comes from the familiarity of the feelings that some of these situations would bring out in them as characters. Even if, like I said, they're not specific situations we've been in, they're probably close enough. Um, and then that's when you bring in the third character of Fogel. And the thing about that is it almost seems like there's like a ladder of sorts here, where it's like Seth and Evan are in the middle here, everybody else is up here, and to them, Fogel is down here. When it's more so they don't realize or they refuse to believe that they and Fogel are pretty much in the same category. Like the whole moment when it makes Fogel look super dorky even to them that he tracked down the girl that he likes in the hallway and then just told her what time it was because he didn't know what else to say, and he saw that as a victory that he had spoken to her at all and she was looking at him. And it's like it's only slightly more dorky and spastic than Evan's interaction with Becca. Like they're very close, and I don't think Seth or Evan wants to know how close to Fogel they actually are. Um, and so to kind of have it to where it's not as like, I don't know if clicky would be the right word because we're not like dealing with that many characters, but I think there's also something unique here in how and maybe you would chalk this, depending on how jaded you are about high school years. Some people may think it unthinkable that Seth and Evan would be as successful as they are with girls like Becca or Jules, and it's not that they're 100% successful by the movie's end, but it feels like we're headed in a good direction by then. Um, but I think the thing about that also is the movie has a lot unique things up its sleeve, despite how similar it might seem to movies like American Pie or Porky's or whatever, about dudes that are just trying to get laid being the whole goal, and the situations that follow in between. But not only does it have feel like it has unique things up its sleeve, but one of those things in particular is the dialogue. And that's what I was talking about, where this feels a bit more above a lot of those other ones, like the whole Apatow area, where it seemed like everything was improv and they were just throwing everything out, and everything was making it into the movie instead of being cut for some reason. And this one, though, feels so... And I guess this will be a good time to address that one of the things that this movie kind of seemingly had to reverse on lately, with things the way they are and the way things are being discussed now. Seth Rogen walked back on the homophobic jokes that are in it and all of his other movies, and he made some big elaborate apology about all the homophobic jokes in his movies. But what's interesting about that, and potentially unfortunate, I guess, but I feel like a lot of those things in this, a lot of the stuff that could be considered offensive dialogue, only makes the characters feel more like teenagers of this era. It only makes the portrayal of them feel more true and ring more true, because Friends and stuff like that just kind of said these, the fact that he calls Fogel Faggle the whole time, and stuff like that. You can imagine people their age saying to each other, particularly in 2007, and I just feel like it adds more of a real quality to it, and the more dated it gets in that sense, the more of a kind of capsule it becomes, I guess, because this does much better with how jokes have aged than say something like Porky's does, but we'll get to that. But when you talk about the dialogue and how stuff like that can actually make the characters feel more real, there's also something about these teen movies like this where a lot of them seem like they might be trying too hard, and so they try to do the really raunchy dialogue. And what's interesting is that whole thing about what adult humor is. Because there's the whole thing where when you're really in your early teens, when you're 13 or 14 or something, adult humor seems like it's at the top, and it's that thing that you strive to be able to have with other people, in your rapport and all that. And when you get older, what's considered adult humor comes off really childish and try hard. And so, what Seth Rogen and Evan Goldberg have done with the way they have written Superbad is they've basically taken raunchy dialogue and turned it into almost some sort of art form, if that's not, if that's not too much to say. Um, there's one line in this in particular that's it's when it's when Seth's talking about getting experience with sex before going to college, and the way he describes it is, you don't want the girls in college to think you suck dick at fucking pussy. And every time I hear that, no matter how many times I've seen this movie, every time I hear that line, I just think, that is art. Like, and when it comes to writing dialogue, that is practically art. That's just one line, and like this is throughout the movie, with how shockingly well written it is, and sometimes it's just throwaway lines, and it's because they're throwaway lines. Like if they had dwelled on it or made one more joke, there are lines in this that would have fallen flat. But when there's like one line that's just left alone as it is, so it's brilliant by itself because it's completely unacknowledged. And the one that comes to many come to mind, but the one that comes to mind for that is when they're in the cafeteria and Evan says, "I give my middle nut to be with Becca." And the fact that that's never addressed is amazing and makes the line all the better. And that's what a lot of these comedies have trouble with, is you can get a sense where the writers get proud. So when they write something they think is funny, they have to make sure that it's shown through the other characters how funny that line is. Like, they'll try to build on it, or they'll dwell on it in some way. But when the writers are confident enough, and as experienced in comedy writing as Rogen and Goldberg, you can just say a line and then just let it be on its own, and then go to the next thing. And that's what the dialogue in Superbad is. Like, it'll say what it needs to say, and then it'll go on to the next thing. I feel like there's hardly any type of dialogue where it just really dwells on one joke and won't get out of it. Something else that might be a problem in Porky's, but but once again, we will get to. I would do the bouncing back and forth thing, but I feel like there's so many things that are crucial about Superbad that I want to get to, because there's also the whole idea of how Fogel is handled. Because what's brilliant about this also is the fact that, despite Seth and Evan being the focus of the movie, Fogel's the one that kind of came out of it with the iconic status pretty much instantly. And McLovin became a thing forever. And it's still one of those references where, even if people haven't seen the movie, if you just say McLovin, they could probably tell you where it's from and who he is. Like, they could point Christopher Mintz-Plasse out of a lineup and say, that's the guy that plays McLovin, even though I've never seen that movie. I could see people doing that. And I think what's really brilliant about Fogel is, both in the writing and Christopher Mintz-Plasse's performance, do something here that's got to be really, really hard. Like, I've never written a character like this, but I can't imagine how hard it would be to pull off. And that is, and like I said, in performance as well, having a character that annoys the other characters but doesn't annoy the audience. And to be able to do that in such a way that we can see when Seth and Evan are increasingly annoyed by Fogel the more he's around, the funnier he is to the audience, and the more the audience loves him. Like I said, to the point that he became the iconic character out of the movie. And I wouldn't even know where to start accomplishing that. Finding that balance of making a character this funny and this memorable, in a completely positive way, while he's like the bane of the existence of many of the other characters. And I think that's also through a lot of the dialogue, where like there's like all the exchanges they have a lot to do with that, where it's like, you would think Fogel would just kind of be bullied by Seth specifically. Obviously, Evan gets along with him a lot more, and along with the whole thing of they're going to be roommates in college. But it's the back and forth where he talks about, like that whole back and forth where Seth talks about how he's going to cut his face off and put it over his own, and Fogel does that thing where he says, you don't have the technology or the steady hand to accomplish a procedure like that. And I think it's that steady back and forth that makes him not just, another bully character. Because I feel like the more the audience would laugh at Seth putting him down, if that's all it was, then I don't know that he would have the staying power as a character that he does. But the fact that he always has a comeback for Seth, I think helps him stand a lot taller than these other characters that are just kind of the butt of all the jokes, and then that's the end of it. That's just their whole meaning for existing, is to be the butt of the joke. And while that is Fogel's existence, he always has something to give back, and I feel like that's makes a strong case for how he's become the iconic character that he has. Um, Apart from him just being like the sort of quintessential dorky character, like it's really funny to me when you look at movies like Porky's and how they have that problem where it's like all the actors look like they're 30 or something, and while they're supposed to be like 17 and 18 and getting out of high school, Fogel looks like he's like 15. Like he looks even younger than he's supposed to, and I think all of that really comes together. Um, I was just remembering another line. And that's the thing with movies like Superbad. It's just these lines by themselves stand out in this way that accomplish something that it would take an entire scene in another movie to pull off, being this memorable. It's when Seth has the line about making a pubic salad with Seth's own dressing, and it's like the way this dialogue just seems to fall out of the sky. And it's like, it's the kind of thing where like you go into a movie like this and you expect raunchy dialogue and raunchy situations, but to do it in this way is so like there's a reason it took off the way that it did, because it's like you have raunchy comedies and you have teen comedies, and then every now and then you have a Superbad that's something just a little more that takes it to another level, to where it can accomplish a lot more with a lot less. And despite being a 2-hour movie, like how it's able to carry that, is says a lot about that, I think. So, but I think going more into also what helps in making it a coming of age movie is just some of the way it handles some of the smaller things, like the whole idea of Fogel going in with a fake ID, and that being a whole sequence in itself, that's really memorable. But there's the moment when he walks, like it's the whole thing where like Fogel getting a fake ID and it's got a ridiculous name on it. It says he's from Hawaii. It's stuff that feels very movie like. Like this is a joke that would be in a movie. You wouldn't have a friend that would actually do that. And attempt to get away. You might have a friend that would get an ID like that, but he wouldn't necessarily try to get away with using it. Surely, well, nowadays I don't know. There's a lot of idiotic people. I mean, there's always been idiotic people, but you could have a friend that might be crazy enough to pull that off. But more often than not, a guy like Fogel probably wouldn't. Which is a sort of movie scenario. But when he walks in and he sees the "you must be 21 and have ID" and stuff like that, and the way that's shot with like that dooming music and the way Fogel looks at it and like how it goes into slow mo, it's that is an actual really real and relatable thing where it's like when you see a sign for the rule that you're breaking and how intimidating a sign can be, particularly when you're of the age of these characters, and you can still like you're still at an age where you can be intimidated really easily. Stuff like that just like really rings true in a really unexpected way, regardless of the situation that's happening here. um, and that's not even to mention like that's like this is the situation where we bring in Michaels and Slater, the cops that are Rogan and Bill Hader. And I feel like, obviously, I feel like one of Bill Hader's biggest fans at this point, and I say that proudly. And I really want to say this might have been, unless I saw Saturday Night Live like in passing, but he didn't really stick in my mind. This is the first time I remember like really seeing Bill Hader, I think, and clearly an impression is made here with the both of them. And this is another thing where you're talking about jokes in this particular era, and like how like all of the Michaels and Slater jokes are at the expense of them abusing their power. And while that might seem like a very touchy thing, not that it's like a new thing, but it's the idea of it being the core of the humor of these two prominent characters. But I will say, about jokes like that, and about Seth Rogen trying to make amends for his homophobic jokes, I could be wrong here, and I could just not be looking in the right circles or hearing the right people or something, but I don't know that I've ever heard anybody personally, um, like, turn on Superbad. Like, I don't, like, I don't recall anybody, like, going after Superbad and saying Superbad is very dated and Superbad's jokes don't work anymore. Everything I hear about Superbad still is nothing but positivity. Even with the way, what's deemed acceptable in humor has changed or not. I've never met or seen anybody personally that's like anti Superbad now, and I feel like that also says something about the, I don't know if I want to say the power of it, but just how well written it is and how well crafted like the characters are and all that, and just the fact that it's actually funny plays a big part in this as well. Like, you could say that it's maybe too dark of a joke when the cops run over Seth, and then Rogan gets back in the car and tells Fogel, like, hey man, we need you to sign this thing that says that it's his fault, so we can just move on. But it's because we know these characters the way we know them at this point. All of the scenes with Rogan and Hader are still hilarious to me. Maybe that's wrong. I don't know, but that's what it is. And there's dark humor throughout it, particularly with them. The scene where they're at the bar, and Hader's radio comes on, and it's a guy screaming, "We need your help! Oh my God, there's so much blood," and he turns it off entirely to keep talking to Fogel. That joke is still so funny to me. Like, I'm practically falling out of my chair laughing every time I see that moment, and it never fails. So yeah, it's dark humor is here throughout it, and I'm sure there's more. There's the whole thing. That's another sort of the coming of age angle, is the idea of Seth going into the liquor store and trying to get the booze, and he keeps having these daydreams, these very over the top daydreams about what could happen. And it's like, it's just the kind of over the top stuff you'd be afraid of, as like when you're practically a kid still. All the way up to getting his throat cut with a bottle, or being congratulated in his $80 bill or whatever that was. And it all still works, and all comes back to those core elements of the story itself, of being a coming of age movie, or being, how these characters interact and how they react to each other or what's happening around them or anything like that. So just the conversations stand out in a way, particularly the ones between, like, Fogel towards the beginning, like when he comes waltzing out in slow-mo with that vest. It is so there's so many things in Superbad that'll never not be funny no matter how many times you've seen it. And this kind of started, like I feel like this is what my mind always goes back to when I hear a joke that's so prominent in these improv-heavy movies now, which is saying somebody or something looks like something else. Like that whole tired scene in Deadpool that ran out of gas really quickly, where T.J. Miller's just talking about all the things Ryan Reynolds looks like with his, his fucked up face. And it just goes on and on and on, and it gets really just unfunny the more it goes on. But it's like, whenever, I think it's Seth tells him he looks like Pinocchio with the vest, and then later Evan tells him he looks like Aladdin. And it's like, to do that same joke twice in the same scene, and for both of them to be equally funny, is how you do that. And like I said, I think the fact that each one came from a different character, it's not just somebody saying, you look like this, you also look like this, you also look like this, and on and on and on, and it gets fucking tired. And it's like, this, just, like I said, just doing it, just getting the joke out there, and then going to the next one, is what this movie's really good at, and what so many comedies seemingly cannot do. They can't stretch it out. And you kind of get that sense. Like how the fact that supposedly Seth Rogen and Evan Goldberg were writing this when they were really young, like when they were like in their early teens, like 13 or something. And then clearly it has evolved into their adulthood and the different times and decades and all that. But you do get the sense this is a script that was worked on for quite some time, for how every beat of it feels like it's a new, fresh thing in the movie. If not in comedies in general, at least it's like doing something with the stuff that's familiar, as far as like jokes and situations go. And it's crazy how some things can just stick. Like I was talking about the middle nut line, where it's just said and then it just goes on to the next thing, and you're left with it. You have to make what you will of that line. And one of the things both me and my brother love to reference is the fact that Bill Hader does his Yoda impression. And then after he does it, he says, he calls him Yoda from Attack of the Clones. And it's like of all the Star Wars movies. And it's like, that's the kind of thing where you get the sense that that's a Bill Hader joke. It's like that's a line where I could see that probably being improv, where it was his idea to say, Yoda from Attack of the Clones, as opposed to, anything from the original trilogy or anything like that. No, specifically Attack of the Clones. And it's not even like, this is post Revenge of the Sith. It's not like this was when Attack of the Clones was out or anything. And it's like just being left with that's what Slater chooses to say the movie Yoda is from. It's just something that throwaway can be so memorable that you can continue to reference even to this day when the movie's like 14 years old now, which is crazy. And it's and yeah, stuff like that really sticks. And also talking even more about little moments. Like even how many times you see this movie, there may be stuff that you don't even realize, until like the 50th viewing. Like, it took me forever to notice the moment when, after Seth has danced with Carla Gow, I think her name is, the girl that gets the blood on his leg, which to my understanding is another joke that I guess some people were worried about, but it's, yeah, like being a misogynistic joke or something. But the thing that stands out to me, not just the plot turn that it's Kevin Corrigan's fiance, and Kevin Corrigan, who we've already seen beat the shit out of multiple people, but that guy that points out to Seth, you have blood on your pants, we see him again later when they're like looking for Seth. And before we get that moment where he points Seth out, he's with the guy next to him, and they're having a conversation where he's like, the guy next to him is really bummed out about something, and the guy's trying to build his confidence up. It's like this really wholesome thing going on between two friends who might as well be extras in this scene, whose only job it was to point out Seth's pants earlier. And stuff like that I really appreciate. And just the general idea that not all the jokes have to be raunchy. Like the whole idea of when Evan gets stuck in the room with like David Krumholtz and Martin Starr and all the other guys. And this scene could have gone into anything. It could have gone into any direction. And it goes into the Evan singing thing and them mistaking him for somebody else. And that's and the way they like call him, I can't remember who it is. Like he's somebody's brother or something. And when the fight breaks out, I think it's Martin Starr that says, like, hold him down, whoever that was, brother. Like, that's what he calls him. Just all these lines that get hidden amongst the chaos. Not to mention the song that Evan is singing is playing on the cops' radio when they pull up. Just stuff like that. That's another thing that to my understanding, was improv, was Bill Hader screaming Panama when he pulled up at the end. Right before they crashed the car, and the fact that they actually ended up just getting the rights to the song, because that was like them getting the rights to the song and using it in the scene was so last minute because Bill Hader just did that when he pulled up, and stuff like that, where people on the set can just sort of make the magic happen with something that just seems like some throwaway idea that, in any other case, might not even make the movie, might just get cut out, but then to go the distance to get the rights to the song and then make it the anthem for the whole scene, really shows the magic of what improv can do. And that's the kind of thing that gets lost in these movies that really, really rely on it and use it way too much and don't know when to cut out what. And you, because you can see how influential this movie was as it went on when we see stuff like I really love Booksmart by itself, but the Superbad influence is so abundantly clear in it. Like they are basically literally the same movie. As good as Booksmart is by itself, because it does have its own individual characters, even if they're kind of going through all the similar beats. Um, but the fact that Superbad feels like this sort of grand, like I said, the teen comedy and this whole plot of just getting booze and getting laid sort of thing could just be any other generic teen comedy, but that this did something that so many other movies wanted to do after it. Blockers, I remember getting a lot of attention also for basically like the whole plot with the girls was like basically this as well. It's like there's so many movies after Superbad that you can see Superbad in, and that's also when you can kind of really tell that a movie has done something right, especially when it's in a genre that's feels so done to death already, and like there's not really much else you can squeeze out of it. And then Rogen and Goldberg come along, and Greg Mottola, the director, should probably get a lot of credit here as well, who I've mistakenly not mentioned until now. But yeah, and also just the way, like talking about some of the direction, like the way some moments are really built up and are really dramatic. Like I was talking about the under 21 sign, and then there's also stuff like when we have the really big music when Seth gets his throat cut in his fantasy, and then it just cuts off, and there's just like no sound as Seth just kind of walks back out with his tail between his legs, and just the way stuff like that is handled. There's one moment in that vein that just kills me every time. It's another thing that's so simple, it has me falling out of my fucking chair every time. And it's when it's the moment when they've got the cops pull up and they've got Seth and Evan on the ground, and then there's that moment where Evan is making the decision to run, and it's a really big moment. It's like in slow mo. The music is huge, and it's this really big, just reeling up. It's going to be this big dramatic moment, and then we just cut off, and the music is gone entirely, and Evan, the way Evan just runs away, and the sound of him running away, that's one of the funniest things ever to me. Like I said, it can just be the small things, and you can't even necessarily explain why. Um, just a small thing like that can be just the funniest fucking thing you've ever seen. And like I said, this movie is so good at finding those little moments on top of having the really big moments also. Because it does, fall into the trap of, like, eventually, finally, once they get to the party, we get the party montage. That might as well be, a trademark thing at this point. And usually that's just the filler of movies like this, where you just get montages of people drinking and dancing. Usually it's in slow-mo. It has, whatever song is popular at the time on the soundtrack. And it's just there being nothing. There's nothing fun about it. You're just watching this go by very slowly as a sort of transition until they figure out what they're going to do with the story next. But to put the party montage at the end as this almost celebratory thing of they finally arrived at the party. And we even have that moment where we cut to Seth, and it's like, of all the dramatic stuff that's happened and all the bad things that have happened to them throughout the movie, we see Seth sort of recapping what was happening, and he's like kind of becoming the life of this portion of the party that he's in. It was kind of like what we talked about Pineapple Express, when Rogen was talking about, like, on the commentary for it, how the scene where Rogen, Franco, and Danny McBride at the end of Pineapple Express are just sitting in that diner and just recapping the movie, like saying, like, hey, remember when that happened? And it's like, they're saying, like, because people are going to walk out of the movie doing that anyway, we'll just get that part out of the way. For them, and have the characters do it themselves. And it's like, to see Seth kind of recapping the movie itself for these people at the party, almost like actually plays a part in it, because it's like, it actually, like, Seth actually feels like involved with other people, which goes into that whole sort of separation anxiety thing he's got going on with Evan. And the way that's revealed throughout the movie also, like the whole thing of, oh, they're going to different schools, and then, oh, he and Evan and Vogel are going to the same school, and then the way it's gradually revealed that they're going to be rooming together, which is even worse for Seth, and then it's even further revealed that Seth already knew this, and it's like the way that unravels is really well done, more well written than it needed to be, and stuff like that really works also. And like I said, really feels like it's taking it to, even if it seems very simple and almost basically writing 101, when it comes to movies like this, it's the kind of thing that you can appreciate, and it kind of feels like it's taking it to another level than other movies might, as far as like character development goes. Because we do have these moments when we do have the sort of like, and the thing about it is when it gets to that point, because another problem we've talked about endlessly that comedies have, especially in this Apatow phase, are wanting to be comedies for an hour and then wanting to be a drama for another hour. And it's like, at least remember to be funny. Come on, like that's what. But the way this kind of sets up from the beginning, how inseparable Seth and Evan are, and the fact that they're going to different schools, it's established in like the first scene. So as we sort of get to that point, and that drama comes up every now and then, when it does actually go into this whole thing where like Seth and Evan blow up at each other, and then at the end when they have this, and I like the fact that the blow up's kind of in the middle, so that when it gets, so like the entire second half, they don't go their separate ways. They go their separate ways at the party, but they get involved in such similar situations that it feels like there's that connection there, so that by the time we get to the end, there's not some necessarily a big long prolonged I'm sorry sort of thing. It's just like, hey, we're just, we're friends and we really care about each other and stuff like that. And the way they do that so simply, without like really overloading it with this forced drama or something, I think makes it feel really real also, because that's kind of the way like those friendly spats go, is they're just very short-lived usually. I mean, if they're not friendship ending, they're short-lived. There's not really much of a middle ground. And so the way they handle that is really nice. And then how it actually ends on a pretty serious note. Like, it doesn't end on a joke, really, of any kind when they go their separate ways, and Evan has Becca and Seth has Jules and all that. But talking about how they end up with them also, going back to the party, it's another sort of interesting, like, a clever twist on the writing where the whole idea is, oh, they're going to be super drunk, so we need to be super drunk. And then it's the whole thing where it's kind of the reverse thing, where Becca almost kind of has this innocence about her, and Jules kind of has this, she's the one that's setting up the party, so she's probably the one that parties the hardest of probably at least the group of them. And then it turns out that Jules is completely sober, and it's Becca that is just completely out of her head by this point. And the fact that Evan has to force drunkenness on himself, and how it's really, and how the drunken people are the ones that are like humiliated at this point, where it's not that Evan and Seth just completely humiliate themselves and completely alienate themselves. It's Becca that has the embarrassing moment by puking on Evan, and Seth gets the embarrassing moment of passing out on Jules, literally. And so the way that's sort of equally divided up in this sort of unexpected way, and it's not just, things going completely south or things going completely good. It's like there's just a nice enough mixture of it that the conflict kind of settles itself, which is really interesting. So, yeah. So, I don't know. Like I said, I was going into this thinking it might be kind of hard to talk about Superbad because all you'll want to do is just quote it. And that's what people have been doing since 2007, endlessly. But yeah, some of those just, like, most of them just still really work. But like I said, it's really the way that it's written and how they handle the characters that I think is a really well done aspect that might go under the radar because it's so quotable and some of the situations are as outrageous as they are and stuff like that. But just the fact that it's really well crafted in general, I'm hoping is not going under the radar, or hasn't gone under the radar over this 14 years or so that it's been in existence. So I think that's pretty much what you can say about that, at least as far as where I'm coming from. Now, I've been bringing Porky's into this every now and then, talking about how Porky's might do something lesser in the way compared to the way the Superbad does it. But it is worth noting that Porky's comes from the very eclectic Bob Clark, who did the original Black Christmas, but also did A Christmas Story, and also somehow did Baby Geniuses, and he did this. I mean, if that's not four completely different things, and he has other, like, random credits around, But these four in particular, like, really stand out to show. Like, he was, like, you want to talk about eclectic directors, he was, there was a lot of stuff he could do. Not necessarily all, like, he made, like, one of the great all-time horror movies with Black Christmas, and one of the great all-time Christmas movies. Um, as far as, you know, Porky's goes as being a teen movie, we're just not going to talk about Baby Genius. It exists, and we know it exists, and that's enough. So, going into this, though, you can immediately tell where Superbad might be a bit timeless, and in a sense Porky's could be a bit timeless, because, like I said, the whole teenager formula, and the fact that teenagers have been wanting the same thing since the beginning of time, you could consider these timeless in a sense. But where Superbad, for sure, I think, falls into that category, for now, I can't see that far into the future, but as far as Porky's goes, while it may have a timeless concept, it does really depend on where your humor lands, because I would think one of the reasons in particular I talked about Superbad first is I can imagine me talking about Porky's first, and people thinking like, oh, you don't have a sense of humor, and oh, you must not like raunchy stuff, it must be too much, you must be offended easily, or some bullshit like that. So I wanted to establish immediately that that is clearly not the case, given my thoughts on Superbad, and a number of other movies like this. Like I said, we talked about the American Pie movies multiple times on this channel. I did that one video with American Pie and Fast Times. No, if I really wanted to get under your skin, I would have done a video on Animal House, because I don't care for Animal House. But as far as that, and I think the reason that I think the reason I don't care for Animal House is has similar reasons for why I don't really care for Porky's either. But to kind of stay on this area of what Superbad does right and where Porky's might fall short in these same categories, first off, there's not really much character connection, and I guess you could say, is a movie like Porky's really, is that its point? But yeah, it kind of is when you go back, because if you haven't seen Porky's in like years or even decades, your memory of it might possibly be different from what the movie actually is, or what it's trying to be. Because for most of the movie, it's probably how it's remembered. Literally just a series of unconnected events that are these characters getting into these raunchy situations and the outcomes of those. Usually ending in some form of humiliation involving nudity or whatever, or insults about, you know, dick size or something like that. Very sort of base level, like, you know, caveman dialogue between these people. These dudes that are apparently high schoolers. But the thing here is, it has this whole other thing where we were talking about how eventually comedies like to get serious. There actually is a point, kind of a turning point in Porky's, and there's some things that you can see throughout the movie, but the lines kind of get blurred because the movie's so over the top with the way it does its comedy. Like, I know Bob Clark has said that he, like, gathered different stories from just his own life and people kind of in his age group, and stories from their youth, and they were kind of translated into the events that you see in this movie. Despite how a bit over-the-top and movie-like still a lot of them feel, especially compared to some of the situations in Superbad, which may have been smaller by comparison, but at the same time, despite Porky's reputation for being this really, really, really raunchy movie, particularly for its time, you watch it now, and we had a similar talk about the opening scene of American Pie, which was the opening scene of Pee-wee waking up, and he's hard. And that's the joke. He wakes up, and he's hard, and his mom walks in. And when you see that that's the first joke, despite its very raunchy reputation, you can say somebody that doesn't like Porky's might be too offended by how raunchy it is. A hard-on joke to start off with is very tame right now. Like, it's very, like, oh, you're not really gonna do anything. Like, if anything, American Pie was kind of expanding on that. And the opening of American Pie feels very tame nowadays. And it's like when you have like the opening scene of Superbad when they're just talking about like the porn websites. Like Seth describing the porn sites is more raunchy than what we see in the openings of these movies, really. And it's so there is that, but there's also that thing where it's like I don't want to put people in a box that like Porky's and find Porky's funny, because there are definitely things in Porky's that are funny, that are still funny. They're there, but there's also a lot of stuff in Porky's where it's like, it's very easy to imagine their jokes that like somebody's creepy uncle would think are the height of hilarity, that are just the absolute peak of comedy. Um, and I just don't know that it's there. And I'm trying to put myself in 1982, which was nearly a decade before I was even born, so that's a little hard to do, but I'm trying to put myself in, like, I'm thinking about other movies that were out in 1982 and trying to put myself in that mindset of what the humor would have been like then. Because clearly it felt like it was a raunchiness level that was fairly new, because Animal House was only 3 or 4 years old at this point. And like I said, this movie was massive. Like number one for like 8 straight weeks. And like I think it was only taken out of its number one spot because E.T. came out. Like that's what it took, E.T. to take down Porky's. That's how fucking big this thing was. So when you go into that, I look at, like I was talking about some the jokes in Superbad that work just as well when they're not raunchy, like Evan singing, for instance. So you go to one of the beginning scenes of Porky's and you have the egg joke. And it's like, first off, you're not quite, there's a lot of jokes in Porky's where I'm not quite sure where we stand, where we're supposed to stand from our perspective as an audience. Because you could say there's jokes that are, like before we go into the egg thing, there's a lot of focus on anti-Semitism in Porky's, which is kind of jarring. And the question, and the thing about it though, is that there's a lot of mean-spirited humor in Porky's. Like when the shower scene, I mean, in itself, you know, is the shower scene, but specifically the moment when the girl they call, like, Blubber O'Neill, I think, the fat girl, stands in front of the hole, and then he says, you know, he screams lard ass, and that's like the peak of that scene, the comedy of that scene. And you can say, okay, Porky's has mean-spirited humor, but there's another character that is constantly going after one of the characters in this who is Jewish and making a lot of, you know, anti-Semitic comments. And this eventually becomes like a point of drama. And I think it's not till it reaches a point of drama you're ever quite sure if the Jewish jokes are supposed to be funny or not. Because so much of the humor is already kind of derogatory. Like, it's a little hard to tell. Like, I mean, they set up a bullying angle, but like I said, it's especially coming from a 1982 era, where this was the funniest thing ever in 1982, that's kind of hard to gauge. So, with that more extreme example in mind, let's go back to the egg scene at the beginning, where it's like, it's this whole prank where it's like, you know, oh, here's a raw egg, and then here's a hard-boiled one, and you think it's going to be the raw one, but so you're fine, you don't have yolk all over you or whatever. And that's the joke. And they do it twice, because they do it to Pee-wee, and then Pee-wee desperately wants to do it to Meat. And we have to go through the whole scenario twice in a row because of this, and it's all build up to the punchline that we know is coming. And that feels like such an ancient joke and such an ancient prank. I can't tell if a 1980s audience, or in effect our today audiences, are supposed to find that funny, or if it's because it's supposed to feel like a dated joke because the movie's set in the 50s. I really have no idea where we stand here on the humor. I have no idea whatsoever. So, I don't know, but like I said, even if it's supposed to seem like a lame joke, or even if it's supposed to be a genuinely funny joke for the movie itself, it's that whole thing of there's a lot of time in this movie. The movie's only an hour and a half. It's like an hour 38. And there's a lot of time in this movie spent waiting for punchlines to come, and they're punchlines that we already know. Like, you don't have to have already seen or even heard of this movie, or even seen, like, derivative versions of the jokes in this movie. Just watch the movie by itself, and you can still see its punchlines from a million miles away. And I said, a lot of the movie is just waiting for those punchlines to come, even though you already know what they are. Long in advance. Before Pee-wee's even walking over to Meat. Before Meat's even brought into this egg situation, you can probably imagine how this scene ends. But you just have to wait for it to play out. And then you're expected to be on the floor laughing when Meat gets the unboiled egg in his face. So, I don't know. That's what it feels like a lot of the movie is. And then there's also stuff where, like, I was talking about how cleverly written Superbad is, and how it basically turns its raunchy dialogue into an art form. There's nothing clever about Porky's. Like I said, Porky's has funny scenes in it. I'm not gonna deny that it does. But I can't think of a single thing that's not a cheap laugh. And it's like, I'll give it those cheap laughs, but it really doesn't earn much of anything. And their idea of a setup and a payoff is the Kim Cattrall stuff, which I find her insufferable anyway. But but her character is this one joke where we kind of see her in the background, and the other coaches keep calling her Lassie. And the big joke of the movie, they're really, really building up to. They spend over an hour building this joke in this movie that's barely an hour and a half. It's like, oh, why do they call her Lassie? Why do they call her Lassie? Why do they call her Lassie? And we know it's going to be some variation of what it ends up being. But when we finally get to that point, after all that build-up, you would think there would be some bigger payoff. Like, it would be like something that maybe not necessarily like really unfolds, but something like really, really, like, this is gonna be the joke of the movie, the way they're building this up. Because, I mean, they kind of build up the shower scene because they try it once and fail, and then they try it again, and then it builds up to the whole thing where, like, Miss Ballricker grabs Tommy's dick and all that, and that ends up being the big payoff. Which, if you want to pinpoint what's considered the joke of the movie, like, I guess the most iconic joke of the movie, that would probably be it. But, I mean, you would think it would be this Lassie thing with how much build-up there is. And sure enough, it's that Kim Cattrall howls when she's fucking. And this just kind of goes on for a really long time. And I don't know if it's supposed to get funnier the longer it goes on, but it's one punchline. That, like I said, we could probably figure... Like, we at least probably knew it was going to be some variation of this. And it just goes on and on for seemingly forever. And it's that one... Like, it's not building on itself. It's just the one punchline. Really, really, really stretching as far as it will stretch. So... that's what's, like, the peak humor of it when you're looking at where the movie's coming from. So, and that, or just pranks. Like, when they're at the first of two brothels, and then the guy comes out with the machete, and they run off. That's one of the things that's funny to me, that always gets me. That one shot of the cops driving down the road in the dark, and they're like, hey, it's a slow night, nothing's going on here. And then just kind of Pee-wee just comes out of the darkness. That shot's really funny to me. But apart from that, there's just... Like I said, it's all predictable punchlines, and it's all... There's no real... And yeah, they're talking about the pranks. The other brothel scene where they go through a trapdoor. And that whole trapdoor thing sets off the rest of the... Like, it sets off the climax. The whole idea of getting revenge on Porky himself. And that's the whole thing, is given the title and the way Porky is built up, I almost think if this movie had a little more focus, and you would think... Because let's talk about this before I go into that. Because they tie together. the whole idea of looking at the fact, like, it might seem really, really, really random that Bob Clark made this movie and also made A Christmas Story. Not to mention his others, but specifically those two. But when you look at it, A Christmas Story is just a series of events. That's all it is. It's like, this thing happens to Ralphie, and then this thing happens to Ralphie, and then this thing. Sometimes his friends get involved, sometimes his family gets involved. But more or less, it's just things that are happening in Ralphie's life, one after the other. And there's only one through line, the whole fact that he wants the BB gun. And Porky's is basically the same thing. It's just a series of events that basically play up like they're a collection of memories from somebody's youth. Like, it's weird how similar the structures of Porky's and A Christmas Story are, and where they're coming from, and the way they're telling their story. And once again, while the through line in A Christmas Story is Ralphie wants the BB gun, the through line in Porky's is PB wants to get laid. And it's... but, I mean, apart from that, they're basically the same movie. It's really weird. But, at the same time, though, there is a certain charm to A Christmas Story because you can imagine all those things being something a character like Ralphie would go through in that era. Because A Christmas Story is, what, in the 40s, I think? So the decade before Porky's is supposed to be in. But when you look at Porky's and the situations they go through, like I said, there's definitely, it definitely feels like the whole thing where the teacher is, pulling a dick through the hole after the whole thing. That whole kind of prank. A lot of them feel very movie-like. Getting involved with somebody like Porky is very, very movie-like. And so that's what I was getting to with the Porky thing was it almost feels like, as well as the series of, like, events that feel like memories coming through with A Christmas Story, I feel like Porky's might have been better off sticking to something. And the whole idea, the whole setup of getting involved with Porky, and then the aftermath of that, and then getting revenge on him, could have easily been the whole movie. And maybe they could have done something, but the way it just has that really directionless feel of one unfunny thing followed by one semi-funny thing followed back to something that's not really that funny. Because, like I said, this is the case where a lot of the humor does feel like your older relatives might think is the funniest thing ever, but I don't know. But like I said, I don't really care for Animal House either, so I don't know if it was just maybe this era of comedy wasn't working for me. I don't know. Maybe I can get more into the why Animal House doesn't work for me in another video, but I feel like it'd be pretty similar to what my problems with Porky's are. So that's and talking about it going down a serious road, where we've got the whole thing with Tim's dad abusing him. Tim's dad, played by Wayne Maunder, of all people, from Lancer and Custer and stuff like that. Luke Perry played him in Once Upon a Time in Hollywood. It's that whole thing, and then the whole anti-Semitic thing, these start to go in serious directions at, like, the very last minute. And it clashes hard. Where I was talking about with Superbad, how they set up immediately the whole thing of Seth and Eva are going to have to part ways, and then Fogel's involvement in that. There's something throughout the movie that sets that up so that when the dramatic beats happen, they don't feel like they clash with the comedy. And the fact that a lot of the comedy in Porky's is so over the top, it's when they're trying to be serious at the last, like, it's one thing to be trying to be serious at the last minute, but with the kind of comedy they were going for, being what's clashing with it, there's definitely something here that's not meshing, and then it just kind of feels like the movie just ends abruptly, where it's like they bring back the Porky's thing, like that was going to be the one, that was like basically their one sort of narrative point to be able to come back around to something, so that we can have some kind of conclusion. Despite the fact that the sequel went right back into it. It's called The Next Day for a reason, it turns out. Which to my understanding is what we have to thank for A Christmas Story existing, because apparently Bob Clark wanted to make that, and then they said, well, we don't really want to make that, but we'll let you make it if you make Porky's 2, because the first Porky's was like a money machine for quite some time. So, that's really, well, I guess I could talk about another really funny scene. To give Porky some credit would be, you look at the iconic scene, the shower scene, and it's like it's as far as what's funny about it, it varies because there's the whole setup where you have your selling point. You have something that probably kids in high school often fantasize about is seeing their female classmates in that particular fashion. But then there's the whole joke of Tommy putting his dick through and then Miss Ballbreaker coming in and pulling it. And that being the joke. But then there's also the lard ass joke where they out themselves. And it's not so much the lard ass moment, like him screaming get out of the way, that's funny. It's that look on his face when he realizes that's what he just did is the really funny part. But the really funny thing about the shower scene definitely is the follow-up scene. When Miss Ballbreaker is here in the principal's office with the coaches in the background laughing their asses off and trying to hide that they're laughing their asses off, while Miss Ballbreaker very seriously talks about, I need to bring in dudes for a lineup because I know what this dick looks like. And I think what really makes this scene work, on top of the fact of the coach, especially the really serious coach, the older one, it's like giving everybody else shit, is like trying not to lose his mind. And even the principal's losing, and the whole principal trying to choose the terminology. And while all of this is going on, props to Nancy Parsons, who plays Ballbreaker. She plays this so seriously and so straight. The contrast of the way she's playing it, seemingly on the verge of tears, while everybody else is trying to stifle their laughter, and just the absurdity of what she's asking for. This scene is very, very funny. And it might be one of the funniest scenes in the movie, if not the funniest scene in the movie to me. Other people might have opinions that find the whole movie funny, but that might be the really funny scene to me. So everything else is just very, very redundant. They're probably going to end up with their clothes off. They're probably going to end up embarrassed. It's all the same shit. And like I said, the build-ups to the punchlines go on and on for not really much payoff. So, like I said, I could see people, especially in 1982, just howling with laughter over the Lassie bit. But I just don't. I don't know. Comedy's a very subjective thing, so there is that. But like I said, there's plenty of comedies from this era that work, and can inject the drama. Like we talked about stuff like Fast Times. It can be done, and it certainly was done. But it's always interesting. It's always like kind of a luck of the draw thing of what's gonna really, really blow up, and like just go right into the stratosphere of popularity. And somehow Porky's was that movie. So it's like I said, it's got, there's certain iconic scenes, and you can see where certain selling points would be, but it's what it is. So clearly, like I said, I feel like being clever is something that really, really goes a long way and definitely helps you stand the test of time. So I feel like that's where Superbad has been able to really, stay on its feet through the last 14 years it's been out. And in a way that probably will continue to, regardless of what Seth Rogen feels like he may or may not have to apologize for or whatever. I still think it all works, especially within the context. So, and like I said, the fact that it's funny really takes it a long way. And like I said, I think that's another thing where it's like, and I was talking about Porky's having mean-spirited humor and stuff like that. I am really not anti. I mean, there's a. There's, you have to be, careful and really skilled if you're going to do mean-spirited comedy and do it well, because it does really have to be funny, and the situation has to be funny, and what the actors are doing has to be funny. And that has been done. Mean-spirited humor can be done and be very funny. But it's when you're just really not that funny in general. And not even for a reason of, oh, it's too much, oh, it's too offensive. No, just there's just things that just aren't funny. Just and some people may find them funny, but I just don't get it, I guess. I feel like I do get it, but I mean get it in the sense of I don't find it funny in the way other people do, apparently. So that's where I stand with Porky's, basically. So, clearly my preference is Superbad here, but maybe that's just me. So, and I've criticized Superbad-esque movies enough to where I feel like it's not, it doesn't have to do with the era that it came out or anything like that, or me being closer to being able to relate to the things that happen, but it's, I don't know, because it's closer to it is literally like I was the same age as the characters were supposed to be when it came out. There is that, but I don't know. So it's the awkwardness that I think is the kind of relatable thing, and you just don't really see that authenticity amongst the characters in Porky's all that much. They all feel like really overblown movie types. So, yeah. So, I think I'm just going to leave this at this, and we're going to go into the next set of Rocky movies, and then the new releases from this weekend with, like, Malignant and those others. And then go from there. So, until the next thing, I think that's it.